And now we have item 4, which is a presentation on procurement by Suzanne Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. This will be very brief. I hope most members know me. I'm the Business Support Director, and today I'm supported by Senior Category Manager for Property and Professional Services, Tony Peters. Just briefly want to tell you one or two things about some developments within the procurement team, talk a little about support for your subcommittee, and particularly, as the Chairman's asked us, Tony will make some comments around the use of frameworks and tenders. We hope this won't take more than 5 minutes to brief you, and then happy to take a few questions. We thought brief was better. Some of you will be aware from other committees that you sit on, by virtue of a project called Procurement and Procure to Pay, PP2P, we have set up the City of London Procurement Service, and from October it will be purely operated by ourselves. We have had Accenture working alongside us in partnership, and that will end finally on the 30th of September. There's just a few residual resources helping us. And as a consequence, we're actually going to drop the acronym and do what it says on the tin and call ourselves City Procurement. So it's very straightforward as to what it is that we do. Some of you may have come across Chris Bell, who is currently still an Accenture employee. However, he has rather taken to working with us at the City and has applied for and been successful in getting the role as Head of City Procurement. And whilst he will leave the contract on the 30th of September, from that point of view, he'll be back with us officially on the 13th of October to take up the reins. But he came along and met with the Chairman last week, and he's currently on leave this week. And he will be able to support your committee going forward, along with myself. We are also setting up a procurement steering group, which is officers across the organisation, to make sure that actually we're making the most of our approach to category management, to approach the market in the right way, which is the approach we've been taking over the last 3 years, but to really strengthen that and make sure we're getting the right bang for our buck. And also making sure that we as a service are held to account by the business as well, because it is a two-way street. We need things from the rest of the organisation, but we need to provide a very good service as well, and we will be held to account through that group. One of the things that's happened recently is we've got an awful lot closer working relationship with the city surveyors, and in fact some of the resources that used to sit directly in that department now actually sit within Tony's area of responsibility, although still working very closely with our colleagues in surveyors, so that we can provide a service that's seamless and that enables the delivery of the programmes. We also want to look as well at the approach to risk, and discuss this at some length with the Chairman, to make sure that we are, and to quote him, sharing the risk between officers and members, and to make sure that options are given that give you opportunities to decide how much risk we should take collectively as an organisation and how much risk we should pay for effectively, because those are usually our choices in terms of dealing with risk. Of course, there are some risks that we wouldn't want to take, but clearly we need to be able to spell that out to you as part of procurement strategies. And linking into that, a phrase that I brought with me is that public sector has been very good at let and forget, and not so good at managing contracts throughout the length of contractual relationship. And that's an area that we will be developing over the autumn, and there'll be more to say about that in due course, to actually make sure that we skill up the whole organisation to make sure that we get best benefit. That's all I wanted to say. Tony's just going to say a few words about our approach to tendering and some of the priorities for construction projects, which generally form the vast majority of your work on this committee. Thank you.
Suzanne. So just to start, to give an overview of frameworks. Frameworks are a set of agreements that are already in place that we can call off against, and there are good benefits for using frameworks, such as the suppliers are already pre-qualified, prices are fixed at a point in time, so as the years go on, the rates that you're fixed at are lower, and your services are already defined with legislation in mind. On a flip side to that, when the market changes or when legislation changes, those frameworks are then potentially out of date and requiring some work. In the city, we currently have an over-reliance on a limited supply base, a limited amount of frameworks, and what we're trying to do is firstly increase the amount of frameworks that are available to us, and in such way making more suppliers available to us, And we're doing that in two ways. We're firstly undertaking due diligence on existing frameworks that have been raised by other people and utilising them, but we're also working with people like the London Construction Programme to actually deliver new frameworks which can be shaped to help us. Then also there's the opportunity for us to undertake open tenders, whether that's through an OG process or if it's under threshold using things like pre-qualification databases, things like construction lines, supply river crossing, things like that, where a lot of the due diligence and suppliers has already been undertaken. Officers are often put off by timescales related to undertaking OG tenders or open tenders outside of frameworks, and we're trying to encourage understanding of the process and how we can reduce those timescales. So things that we're looking at also delivering our own frameworks or our own contracts for are things like cyclical works, professional services and asbestos works. Thank you. So priorities for construction projects, what we're looking at as part of the construction category board and implementing into our category strategy are around counteracting the rising tender prices. Especially in London, the construction market is overheating. Just today, we've had some kind of publication notification about how subcontractors are overworked in the market and prime contractors are finding it very difficult to find subcontractors to undertake the work. There's also rising commodity prices, bricks, concrete are all rising in price, and we need to do something internally to counteract the cost of those rising tender prices. And one of those things that we can do is reduce our transactional costs, change the way we manage procurement internally so that it costs us less, so that we can focus those efficiencies. And you know, it's by driving through value for money. And one of those things is looking at the way we do things, how we break down the projects that we do, and looking at a much more strategic position which faces the market. So understanding which suppliers would find our construction contracts attractive based on value, based on the reputation of the city, based on the output that we're delivering, and facing our strategy to meet them. And also then the final point is looking at supply chain management. So how do our main contractors manage their subcontractors? Are we ensuring that that value for money and the health and safety and the initiatives that we drive as a city are pushing through to our supply chain?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there some questions? Yes, Catherine.
Thank you. I have two questions, Chairman. I can't remember if we stand at this committee.
No,
So
okay.
thank you. The first question is just for assurance that there is sufficient flexibility in this process for taking into account the needs of different service departments who may be procuring for, because some of them are working in fairly rarefied fields. And the other question actually is one which has come up from the external members on one of the committees on which I serve, which is for greater visibility of the financial or other appraisal that we do for suppliers, because as a member of the committee they feel responsible when we place a contract. And I think this may be partly a lack of clarity about the role of our committees with the centre supporting them, but it would be useful to think, I think, what assurance can be given to members of committees that proper due diligence has been done on the financial condition of suppliers and service providers. Thank you.
Thank you for those. Yes, there is absolute flexibility in our approach as far as the procurement service is concerned. We don't have a one-size-fits-all, and actually the more we engage with departments, it being a two-way discussion, the better that those options will be. So that's the purpose of the category boards, that's the purpose of having the procurement steering group, to make sure that there is that good engagement, people are held to account for it, and that actually we can work more early enough with the departments to enable them to have that flexibility rather than find ourselves down one route that we can't get ourselves out of. So that's absolutely our intention, and we will be building on that over the next year. That's one of our priorities. And as regards the greater visibility of financial appraisals, I'm going to hand that one on to Caroline, since it's her team that conducts that.
Thank you, Chairman. I think on the financial appraisal question, just to give members the background, this is where the gateway through which suppliers must go in order to be able to do business with the city. There are two risks. One is that end up with a supplier who doesn't have the financial background or the ability to do business, or in the other way that you might, if you set it too low, then it prevents some of those companies going through. So we do apply that financial appraisal to all the companies that do submit the bids. In terms of the overview and what members would see, at the moment the template we work up gives you the synopsis of which bodies have gone through that appraisal. We did have a number of, must have been about 2 years ago, when questions were raised firstly about the appraisal as regards groups and the financial standing of groups. So we did do a bit of due diligence into the groups and we changed our financial appraisal at that point. My worry is that we could end up in too much detail in these reports. We do a vast number of these appraisals per year, and to actually show members that level of detail I think would swamp you with the paperwork. On the other hand, I'm aware that in that particular committee that we have made the flexibility to give the member that assurance, and my staff are more than happy to go through on an individual basis if members have concerns.
Thank you, Caroline. I think probably we need to look at the overall guidelines at some stage in this committee, because there is the balance, as you rightly said, between making sure we don't have firms that are not going to be able to deliver because they're financially unstable or unstable, but also to make sure we get enough smaller firms and so on. And one of those things is the contract, the published contract, which I think I'm going to be sent a copy of shortly. It's on the website, but just to look at it, but it's far too long, and we need to shorten it. But that's a matter of this committee taking a view, I guess, with the city solicitor and trying to sort of get some balance between cutting out legal risk and making it sufficiently safe to be able to do the work. Michael?
Chairman, I noted that there was the intention to expand the number of framework contracts that exist. Is there a danger in having too many in that is there some optimum number in order to prevent framework contracts from being in competition with each other? But is it, with any one sector, is there an appropriate number of framework contracts to be in existence?
I don't think there's an appropriate number, but what it is, it's about having more choice. So what we're looking to do is have, say, a framework for construction, and then you might have a framework for kitchens, and then a framework for windows, so that you don't always end up actually just having the main contractor who does the major projects. And it's more about drilling down into the specific services that we require to deliver and having things available for that. So if the timescales aren't appropriate to deliver an OG related contract delivery, then the framework there is available and the suppliers on it are specific.
I think it's just worth clarifying on that basis, Deputy, that what we wouldn't do is set up frameworks to compete with one another. We would look carefully at that with the relevant category board and make sure that we're not sort of causing ourselves undue competition.
Anybody else? If not, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thank you.